But the International Energy Agency has reminded us that we need no less than $15 trillion of additional investment above today's promises, not just today's activity, but today's promises, in order to achieve a 450 parts per million world, which unfortunately would certainly not guarantee even the 2 degrees on which the world has agreed as a result of Cancun. Ultimately, the difference here has got to be priced. The reasons for covering that difference with carbon reduction have got to be clear and economic. That means ambition of targets, that means a carbon price. And the first best way of achieving that is agreement on levels of reduction at the international level, starting in Durban. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was moving my feeling from that side to that side all the time in the speech. Did not finally end up is a good or bad, but it is a great possibility if one just do what is need to be done. That was a message, I think. And one actor that can do a lot of things that must be done, that already done a lot of things that must be done, is Laurence Graff, Head of Unit of International Negotiation of DG Klima, European Commission. And I quoted somewhere I saw that European Union has a vision to build a global carbon market. Sorry? Oh. And to work all over the world for this. And without doubt, there is a situation at the moment that the European Emission Trade Scheme is a leading scheme for trading with carbon credits. But in a balance with the total investment in the sector, maybe it's not so big. But what I learned is now we're coming to the third phase. Things will start to happen. Is it like that? The word is yours.
Thanks, and good morning, everybody. Very happy to be with you today and taking part in this panel discussion. The challenge for me will be to, having listened to all of you, to build on all these very interesting interventions and try to give you, by doing so, the EU perspective. Also benefiting, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, were there also at the earlier session, because I think we heard interesting interventions at the very beginning of the day in the other room, notably on the climate negotiations and the perspectives for Durban. I think you ended up with Durban, and rightly so, I may say, because at the end of the day, indeed, what matters, and what matters if we want to be serious about addressing climate change, if we want to be serious about being consistent with the 2-degree objective that we agreed upon last year in Cancun, I mean that the whole international community agreed upon in Cancun, is indeed the necessary level of ambition that we should be committing to collectively, as well as individually, I would say, domestically. And I think we need to have an eye on these two fronts, the two, of course, being complementary to each other, because even if we were to have an international agreement tomorrow, we would still need to have it implemented. Well, that's not the case, obviously. The Big Bang is not, unfortunately, for Durban. But if I may elaborate a bit on Durban, I think it's clear that we sort of ended up in Cancun last year with a good set of decisions. And that was critically needed after the failure of Copenhagen. That was needed to restore the process, and that was needed to take it forward. So we had good decisions, as I said, on the 2-degree. We had the pledges being put on the table by countries, being formalized into the system. We had a good set of decisions, and that was also reminded this morning, and rightly so, on finance, on Forest finance, on longer-term finance, on the Green Climate Fund. We had very important decisions on adaptation, which now feature much more in our discussions, and rightly so. the good decisions on deforestation, but also critically on technologies, which of course is also linked to the finance discussions. But I think it's also fair to say that unfortunately in Cancun, we failed to take a number of very, very important decisions. And I would mention 3 of them. One being linked to the 2-degree objective, meaning the level of ambition. We know, and it's been already recognized in Cancun, that there is a gap between this objective, the emission pathway that would be needed to meet that objective, and the pledges that we have on the table. So this gap is real. This gap is serious. We need now in Durban not only to recognize it, because it was already done in Cancun, but to look at options where this gap can be filled in. And options being looking at sectors that have not been covered yet, and that could be promising. Agriculture, I know that for Africa, that's a particularly important sector. I think we need to look at that. We need also to look at tools at our disposal that would allow us to generate more emission reduction. And of course, the carbon market is one of these tools, and you know, but I'll come back to that the EU is pushing very strongly for beyond the CDM system that we have at the moment, something that would usefully complement that, and that would allow for more crediting, which is the sectoral crediting mechanism. So, I mean, that's that's linked to the ambition gap that we need to address in Durban. Equally important, but in a way it's linked, if we again want to be serious about the 2-degree and move towards what I would call a strong rule-based system. The fact is that in today's world, and that was reminded by the minister at the very beginning, we have a 2-track regime. Basically, we have a system where, under the Kyoto Protocol, a number of developed countries have committed to reduce their emissions up to 2012. And this regime does not include, indeed, the US, and will never include the US, we know by now. And we have another track under the convention where others are also obliged to do a certain number of things, but not to go as far as committing to absolute emission reductions. Now, the fact is that, the reality is that, and we already learned that in Cancun, where the Japanese made it very clear that for them there was no way they could contemplate a second commitment period under the Kyoto Protocol. Now, this has been further echoed by other key players under the Kyoto Protocol, like Canada, like Russia, and perhaps others. So that means that very soon, if not already now, the Kyoto Protocol will be very sort of limited to a very limited number of parties, and it's going to soon become a sort of EU club. So that's the situation we face. So if we want to be serious about tackling climate change, moving towards a regime that will really seriously help us get the emission reductions needed, we really should not lose the opportunity in Durban to look at how we can use the Kyoto Protocol with all its tools, including the CDM, as improved, as expanded, in the transition phase towards a new regime, which necessarily has to be a truly global regime with everybody on board, of course of a legally binding nature, and with mitigation commitments from all, taking, of course, due consideration to the principle that is at the heart of the Convention on the Climate Regime, which is the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. But obviously implemented in the light of today's realities, which are, as we know and as we heard this morning, including from China, from Korea, are completely different compared to the realities that prevailed in '92. So that means that, of course, a number of countries now have new responsibilities and new capabilities and would be expected to contribute more to the fight that we have to tackle collectively. Again, Durban will not allow for the Big Bang to happen, but at least Durban, we should not miss that opportunity to initiate that process and to make sure that we would have this process basically leading to a global framework we believe to be finalized as soon as possible, and we have made it clear that for us it means 2015 and to enter into force at the latest in 2020. I'm just saying that because I think it's important to keep in mind, and again, it's linked to the level of ambition that we would need from everybody. By the way, starting with the implementation of the pledges that have been put forward, and then looking at ways to step up these pledges, including, of course, through the necessary support and necessary tools that would allow for the implementation of such pledges. So that's the sort of general picture I would like to start with, because I think I was a bit concerned to hear this morning that there were sort of low expectations from Durban. Durban will not solve it all, but I think we should not miss that opportunity to move yet a step beyond what we've managed to get in Cancun and move us closer to the regime that we need, building upon fundamentally the acquis and the experience that we'd managed to get through the Kyoto Protocol. You know that as far as the EU is concerned, we are very, very attached to the Kyoto Protocol. I mean, it's self-evident in a way, but most probably these days it's better to say it again. We are attached to it because we believe that, and we are in fact complying with it. We are implementing its rules. We are, to be frank, already going beyond the Kyoto Protocol in a number of instances. As you know, we are covering sectors which are not covered yet by the Kyoto Protocol. So we're doing our best to go as far as we can. We have a legislation in place, a legally binding legislation that will allow us to reduce our emissions by 20% by 2020, at least 20%. So we are completely faithful to the Kyoto Protocol, and we definitely believe that the Kyoto Protocol should have a key role to play in the transition towards the future regime. And that's why we believe, again, that Durban should allow for the rules of the Kyoto Protocol to be strengthened. We know that there are a number of loopholes in the system that would need to be looked at very seriously and rectified. And again, the expansion of the carbon market mechanisms. You know also that in the EU, we're also very attached to carbon markets. The EU emission trading scheme is really the backbone of the EU climate policy. It is in place now since 2005. We have gone through a number of phases. We are looking forward to the third phase now. And we've gradually improved the scheme in the light of the experience gain. It covers more or less 50% of CO2 emissions in the EU and more than 1,000, in fact, 10,000 installations, the most polluting installations. It now also covers aviation, as you may know, with a new piece of legislation adopted in 2008. That's indeed also the backbone of the global carbon market at this point in time, because we are the key players. Having put in place such a scheme, we had hoped, as you know, a couple of years with the new US administration, that on the other side of the Atlantic, they would also move in the same direction. They were preparing for that, and then it stopped. So I think we have, at the moment, little hopes that that things will be moving in the right direction in that connection in the US, although interesting things are happening already at regional level, federal level in the US. So that's also something to bear in mind. But other countries are in the process of developing such schemes. We hear very interesting developments at the moment in Australia, for instance. There has been interesting developments in New Zealand. And other than that, I think China is looking at that also very, very closely at the moment. So I'm sure there will be new promising developments on carbon market pretty soon. So we would be, as you know, interested in linking at some point, should the schemes be comparable. We definitely believe that the ETS is the most cost-effective tool. The other beauty of the ETS, as you may know, and that is now coming to reality with the auctioning of allowances that will start very soon in the EU, is that it helps generate revenues that will in turn be used to finance climate action in developing countries. So let's keep that in mind. That's also another benefit from the system. Now, in relation to the CDM and what I heard from the previous speakers, I think we fully concur that there is obviously room for improvement. There is quite a lot of room for improvement in the system. I think we've been looking at that, and we would hope to get a good result on that in Durban as well, looking at the procedures, looking at the governance. We also need to bear in mind that although I understand the complexities associated to that, the issue of additionality is a very, very important one. And linked to that, the environmental integrity. You may know that in the EU we have taken pretty recently a decision which is linked to the quality of the projects, which would allow to, in fact, to ban a number of projects on HFC 23, which were considered not to provide for the necessary additionality. So I think that's something we need to look very closely now in the UN system. The question of geographical balance, of course, is an important issue, and I understand that. So I think that's something to be looked at also very closely. And linked to that, what came across from everybody, I think, here this morning was the issue of capacity building. So the issue of capacity building was perhaps neglected for too long, and now, yet again, we have in Durban an opportunity to look into that and to do more in that connection. I would say that it goes beyond the issue of the CDM. Capacity building is also about developing projects in general, beyond the CDM sort of dimension. You, Minister, refers to the fact that your country is looking at the high potential in Senegal in terms of renewables and the various aspects of renewables, and the same in Morocco. I think, again, it goes beyond the issue of CDM. And I would say in that connection that it's also, indeed, and you said it, I think it's very important not to be too sort of focused on the international process. We need the international process. We will need the global framework. But before that, because we know it's going to take a bit of time, before that, we should not be losing the precious time we have ahead of us to do more bilaterally, to do more regionally, and to use Far-Stat finance, to use, the traditional ODA, and we didn't wait for Far-Stat finance to start developing projects on climate and energy before, and we will continue to do so. There is, as you said, a lot of potential in terms of energy efficiency. We need to tap into that potential and work with you on that. So there is there is scope, and there is on our side definitely a willingness to do more bilaterally, regionally. With Africa, we have a number of instruments at our disposal. It's the matter of making sure that the priorities will be taken up when this is they come, and that the capacity to develop the project will be there as well on the other side. So I think with all of that, I would perhaps be more optimistic than the many speakers that we heard this morning. I think there is a lot of determination, of willingness. There is a lot of realization as well, as we've seen in Europe, that moving ahead may entail some costs, but will also entail benefits, including short-term benefits. So that's what we definitely need to keep in mind and move away from sometimes to ideological debates which are hindering the necessary progress in the international talks. So let's be pragmatic, again internationally, but also bilaterally. There is a lot we can do together and move in the right direction. Finance, obviously, is key in all of that. We need to look at not only the carbon market part, which is critical. We also need to look into innovative financing sort of mechanisms. That's going to take probably a while, but I think there are a number of interesting ideas that are being floated around. That was discussed in the context of the G20 in Cannes. I'm sure that the next presidency of the G20, being Mexico, will be keen to go on with that. And that should also very much feed in the discussion in the climate talks. Let's also make the best out of the technology committee that will be put in place and be made operational, I hope, in Durban. Let's make the best out of the climate technology network that will also be created in order to exchange views on best practices on technology deployments. I think all of that could be very, very useful. That's what I would say to start with at the end of this session.
Thank you very much. You got a little bit longer time because we are very, very interested to learn what the European Union is really doing. And as I said in the first sentences, it is not an easy topic to talk about. It's a lot of difficult words and a lot of focus on some mechanisms, but at the same time we see the demand, the need for more energy. We see the demand. We know that fossil energy is going down. We need new energy, and this is a help to do that. But even if this instruments is not working perfectly, even if there is problems exact how to use them at the moment, there is a market, obviously, there is a market. If you can look into European Union, of course, there is one of the that pushes this development, and there's a reason for that, of course, is that the local fossil energy resources has vanished, or more or less is on the way to vanish. There's a need to do something, and we have to work in Europe on all these aspects. In that way, Europe is lucky because maybe been a little bit ahead. And that will create an advantage that will give European companies an edge in the future because they have learned a lot now. And I think those countries or those companies that wait too long, maybe try to earn a little bit more money of the old energy, they will have problems later on. But also, who will be the first one out on the scheme? We learned about managing director that got sacked because he did the wrong decisions. And it is not easy to do this, of course. Things changes, but that is life. That is what we have to deal with all the time. But back to basics, there is a demand. There's obviously a demand. And there's a need for resources from Africa, locally, but also possibilities for export. In our magazine, we have a story next issue about nice project in Ghana and in Liberia. And we heard a little bit about the Senegal ambition. But maybe it's time to add on a little bit what will happen in Senegal. But also, now it's also time to make a question, a comment to each one of you, if you want to have a little more precise information or if you want to comment something. So please, we start from the other end again. Will you tell something more what is happening in Senegal now in investment, for example, and plans? As you said, you are one of the very few countries with a minister responsible for renewable energy, and that is very interesting. Why have you chosen to take that decision, for example? That means that you have an ambition. Would you like to comment?
Merci. Donc, pour ce qui concerne le Sénégal, comme je l'ai dit tantôt, nous avons un ministère exclusivement dédié aux énergies renouvelables et aux biocarburants. Pourquoi? Parce que nous avons le potentiel qui est là-bas, le potentiel en énergie renouvelable. Mais également, nous sommes un pays non producteur de pétrole. Et nous savons qu'aujourd'hui, les prix des produits pétroliers, la hausse est vertigineuse. Nous savons aussi, d'après les prévisions, que d'ici peut-être à long terme, les réserves du pétrolier, même si elles ne vont pas s'épuiser complètement, elles vont de façon notoire se réduire. Donc il faut trouver des alternatives, et les alternatives aujourd'hui, c'est les énergies alternatives, c'est-à-dire les énergies renouvelables et les technologies propres, notamment l'économie d'énergie. Alors, pour développer ou exploiter ce potentiel énergétique en énergie renouvelable, il nous faut mettre en place une politique. Nous nous sommes dit, pour mettre cette politique, il faut concevoir un cadre institutionnel, et ce cadre, c'est le ministère des énergies renouvelables, qui, dès sa création, s'est attelé à mettre en place un certain nombre d'outils législatifs et réglementaires. C'est ainsi que nous avons, depuis notre création, eu à élaborer 2 lois. Une loi sur les énergies renouvelables et une loi sur les biocarburants. Les décrets d'application de ces lois sont dans le processus d'adoption, et d'ici fin novembre, début décembre, ces projets seront adoptés. En plus de ces cadres réglementaires, nous avons également élaboré une stratégie nationale de développement des énergies renouvelables qui cadre bien avec les objectifs de développement du Sénégal, mais qui cadre bien avec les objectifs de développement du millénaire. Et dans cette stratégie, nous avons identifié un certain nombre d'axes que nous pensons, en les actionnant, non seulement développer les énergies renouvelables au Sénégal, mais contribuer au développement économique et social du Sénégal par, entre autres, la réduction de la pauvreté, mais également la création d'emplois. Pour cela, il nous faut des investissements, et des investissements surtout privés. Or, le privé ne va pas mettre son argent, ses finances, dans un secteur qui n'est pas rentable. Et pour rentabiliser ces investissements, le meilleur cadre, c'est d'avoir une politique attrayante en termes d'énergie renouvelable. Souvent, on entend dire l'argent est là pour financer l'énergie. L'argent est là pour financer des projets en énergie renouvelable, mais on n'a pas de projet. On n'a pas de projet parce que nous n'avons pas mis en place, et je parle dans le cadre général, une bonne politique en matière d'énergie renouvelable. Heureusement que ça commence à se faire. Il y a l'Agence internationale d'énergie renouvelable qui a été créée il y a bientôt 2 ans, qui a pour ambition d'aider les pays, notamment les pays en développement, à mettre en place des politiques pour le développement des énergies renouvelables, à renforcer les capacités pour l'évaluation non seulement des besoins, mais des ressources. Au niveau du Sénégal, donc, depuis que nous avons mis en place ces cadres réglementaires, mais aussi législatifs, nous avons un certain nombre de porteurs de projets privés qui sont là aujourd'hui au Sénégal. Et nous avons aujourd'hui une dizaine de projets, aussi bien au niveau de l'éolien, au niveau de la biomasse, au niveau des biocarburants, mais également au niveau de l'énergie solaire, solaire photovoltaïque comme solaire thermique. Aujourd'hui, ces projets privés, pour certains, sont sur le point de démarrer, pour d'autres, ils sont toujours en développement, mais toujours est-il qu'au niveau du Sénégal, nous avons aujourd'hui un cadre qui permet au secteur privé de venir investir au Sénégal, où disons, il y a la garantie donc, des investissements, parce qu'au-delà du ministère et du cadre réglementaire législatif qui est mis en place, nous avons également l'APIX, c'est-à-dire c'est l'agence sénégalaise qui est chargée de mettre en place un environnement adéquat des affaires pour donc garantir tout ce qui est investissement, pour donner des incitations fiscales à tous ceux qui investissent dans des projets au Sénégal, aussi bien au niveau du secteur de l'énergie qu'au niveau